Okay, so welcome to the October forecast. Before we get started, let's do a chant for Ganesh. It's always good to clear the path, to clear the mind, and to focus. And so Om Gang Ganapataye Namah is a very simple Ganesh mantra. And even the seed or bead mantra, the Bij mantra is Gum, is a nice one to do if you want to just invoke Ganesh in that way. But let's just say this 3 times. Om Gang Ganapataye Namah. Om Gang Ganapataye Namah. Om Gang Ganapataye Namah. So again, a reminder, I always remind this at the beginning because we really have our own unique circumstances, or dashes as they're called. We have our own unique charts that will show how those circumstances are playing out based on our unique charts. And then we will come to the transits. So the transits are really just the top layer of the cake and really not the main piece. And that's something I always want to emphasize here, that when I'm talking about transits to relay general themes, they are just general unless you're looking at a specific chart. And just again, a reminder that these are sidereal calculations, not the tropical. And so if you are using your tropical, or you're more familiar with your tropical, you can subtract 24 degrees to arrive at the calculations I use for the sidereal. And this quote here, one person's utopia is another's dystopia. I mean, that is basically saying how, the chart is so unique. You can't just simply say that Venus in Virgo is bad for everybody, because it can be very good. And actual fact, and then you might say that something is good, like Jupiter in Pisces is good for everybody. It's not necessarily good for everybody either. It's always more specific for the individual. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a comment. Even just hit the like button. It would be really great, and subscribe. And then if you'd like to get more astrology, of course, you can become a patron. I've only got a few places left, though. I've capped it at 100. I think there are 8 places left on the $5 tier where you get exclusive access. And there's just one place left on the $10 tier where you can email me each month question that you have about your chart or the transits, and also getting physical copies of the magazine and the book when it's out. I'll talk more about the book at the end of this, which is due out in the new year. So you can go to patreon.com/timeline astrology, or just go to timelineastrology.com. You'll find the links. So let's get straight into it. This is one of the transits that is now coming up again, coming to a head again. It was there all last year, Saturn square Uranus, on 3 occasions in 2021. And this is the last time now. So end of September, beginning of October, but really the whole of October, we're feeling this because Saturn is stationing at 24 degrees of Capricorn, and Uranus is retrograde at 24 degrees of Aries. So we have this really challenging dynamic between these two planets, with Saturn having drawn us back and pulled us back maybe into issues of the past, of things that are dissolving, of things that are breaking down, of systems, especially in Capricorn, that are no longer working, while it squares Uranus and Rahu, because Rahu is with Uranus in Aries, and something new wanting to break through, maybe in more violent ways. And there's so many things you can talk about that's happening on the news right now. This oftentimes shows more seismic activity as well, or uprisings, or protests, or what we're seeing just today, what happened in Indonesia with the stadium riots. These kinds of things are a signature of, or this is a signature of those things, Saturn square Uranus. And again, like I said, Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn is just adding to this kind of breaking down of the old. Now, this is just one example I highlighted here. And this is basically one I wasn't sure whether to bring this one up, but it's in the news a lot. And it's not always in the news. And you might say, well, this is always going on. But it's in the news more now because of things that have happened recently in India. And this is a caste system. Now, this is an example of this Saturn Pluto conjunction Capricorn, again, the old systems breaking down and something new wanting to be born. And this is an old system. This is a very old system, and a lot of people feel it's outdated. And when you look at how people are treated based on this system, it's no wonder that people want to uprise against it. So this is the signature of this Saturn square Uranus. If you didn't see the stories, maybe that's something to look into. But there's been a lot more cases of violence against what they call untouchables. And so even just calling them that, it's just disrespectful. And you might say that, okay, this is a tradition that's thousands of years old. But again, this is a signature of this Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn disintegrating an old system that is just no longer appropriate for our modern age. And this contrast and conflict between that and the new age coming through with Rahu and Uranus and Aries. And by the way, we're moving into an age of Aquarius, which is ruled by Rahu. It's just that it's kind of really forceful at the moment, this kind of conflict between the two, the old and the new. The other more obvious one that I didn't include here, because I've been talking a lot about it for patrons and videos for patrons doing the royal family in Britain. And that is also part of this disintegration of the old system. The Queen dying is a big part of that. But also looking ahead, looking at King Charles and how he may abdicate the throne, and how that has to change even if he doesn't, how he's going to change the royal family, pare it down. He's already suggesting he's paring it down, which is, again, Saturn, Pluto. It's like stripping it down to its bare essentials kind of thing. So it's all highly conflicted, though, because, it's not easy to go through these kinds of changes and this contrast between Aries and Capricorn. But it's come to a head again in October. Another thing that's happening in the world you might notice is what's happening in Iran. And so this always happens when Venus goes into Virgo, and it went into Virgo at the end of September. It remains here until October 18th. Venus is also combust. It's disappearing behind the sun. It will be exactly combust by October 22nd. So from the end of September, you can see this theme strongly now in Iran, and women literally cutting their hair, because Venus in Virgo is obviously Venus, where Venus is debilitated. Venus represents women, and it's literally a reflection of what's going on in the heavens. And so last year, there was a similar thing going on, women's issues in a major way. The year before, every time around autumn time when Venus goes into Virgo, there are issues around women. And so you might say, when you combine this with the Saturn-Uranus square, that it actually just makes it more intense, because the Saturn-Uranus square is this uprising and this revolution that's happening, conjoined or combined with the Venus combustion and debilitation. We can talk more about this if you'd like afterwards in the Q&A about any kind of personal experiences of this with Venus. And I'm going to also talk about the upsides of Venus in Virgo right now because of the other transits. And these are the other things that are happening. The stationing planets in October and onwards, which is good news for the long term in many ways. And there is one planet that is kind of running against the grain here, which is Mars, which is about to go retrograde at the end of October. So Mercury first stations, and that is today, October 2nd, as we speak. So Mercury doesn't appear to move and slowly moves forward in the coming weeks, and will pick up speed in October and then move ahead and into Libra. So it's going to quickly cover the ground it's been going back over now recently. So this is a great time in October to get things right, to really get your things in order, to really progress in things that might have been held back. And again, your chart is specific to you, so whatever that is for you, but in a general way, we're all going to be more proactive or more efficient at least. I'll get back to more proactive because there's an issue there with Mars, but let's wait for that for a minute. So Pluto is also going to station on the 8th, and Saturn then afterwards on the 23rd, both in the sign Capricorn. So this suggests that those themes of, the old systems breaking down, as these two planets station appear not to move at all in October, means that things are being held in place, and very precariously as well. And I think that this will be a slow turnaround around these big issues. And again, I've highlighted a couple of systems like the royal family or, the caste system in India, but it's whatever, it's this whatever you've got going on in your own life that is just outdated and it needs a reboot. So you might sense now that your long-term plans around this area of your life, whatever that is starting to at least slowly move forward in October. Then by November, Jupiter also stations by the end of November. So that's another indication of things slowly moving forward here. At the moment, you might have heard it on the news a lot. Jupiter is very bright, and it's as bright as it has been for hundreds of years and will be for hundreds of years. So that means that it's in the mid phase of the retrograde cycle opposite the sun. So the Jupiter is in Pisces and Sun is in Virgo. Remember, sidereal signs. So it's very powerful in one way, Jupiter, but it's also not going anywhere. It's moving backwards. It's asking us to reconnect to something. Neptune is also retrograde, and that breaks them apart, Jupiter, Neptune in Pisces, because it moved back into Aquarius, and it will station in December. But what we're having is Mars is about to retrograde from the end of October, from October 30th. I'll talk more about that now in a minute. And so it is kind of the one that's going against the grain. And it's not only going against the grain in that sense, going retrograde while the other planets move forward, it's also going what's called out of bounds for a long time until next summer. So Mars is about to go rogue, in other words. It's an indication when Mars is very far north of the ecliptic, out of this certain range. It creates a very erratic energy and warlike energy for sure, but kind of going rogue, I would imagine that is soldiers going rogue literally in Ukraine, Russian soldiers perhaps. But again, if we tie that back into our own personal lives, maybe something in our own life kind of going a bit awry and going a bit off. So we need to be mindful of this kind of very revolutionary cycle that's coming up in one way, but channel it in our own way, in a more positive way for ourselves. Uranus is retrograde, but it will continue to retrograde until after Mars is stationed. Actually, it won't station until the end of January. So it was later coming to the whole retrograde party. So Uranus continues to do that until the end of January. So the Mars retrograde, let me just move forward, is for most people a challenge. Because Mars is all about action and being proactive. So what I said about being proactive in October, really, I replaced that with the word efficient. So it is a good time to plan and schedule and manage things, but Mars is slowing down now, and it doesn't move very fast at all in October. And by the end of the month, it will stop moving. It will peak its head into Gemini on, let me give you the dates, on the 15th of, did I put it here? No, I didn't. But anyway, it's moving in on the 15th of October. It will move back into Taurus on the 13th of November. So it's retrograde from 30th of October until the 12th of January. So let me just highlight these here. So it's retrograde November, December, January. It's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere new anyway. It has to go back over things. And so this can be, like I said, kind of frustrating at least, or at most highly volatile in the world. And of course, because it's doing it mostly in sidereal Taurus, it starts in Gemini. So you're talking about issues around communication, trade, travel, and then going back into issues about resources, supply chains, energy problems, all of these things. The winter is going to be very challenged. Now, you don't need me to tell you that, or any astrologer to tell you that. You just need to look at the news to know that's going to be the case. But if we're mindful of it, if we look at our own charts, how do we experience it personally? Where is Mars retrograde for us? Where are Gemini and Taurus in our own charts by house position? This is where we need to be really patient, really patient. So I'll just tell this story quickly. I wrote about it in the monthly forecast, but it's a good one to repeat, because it just highlights how we really don't like Mars retrograde. I was once on a train going somewhere, and before getting to my final destination, the train pulled into a location that it had to actually then pull out of, like reverse out of, to go to the next destination. And so most people on the train are facing forward, because most people like to feel like they're moving forward in life. And then as soon as the train started backing out of the station, nearly everybody in the carriage got up and walked to the opposite side where there was a free seat, to then be able to look forward as the train started pulling out backwards. because most of us just don't like to feel like we're being dragged backwards into something. We like to feel like we're moving forward. So I was the only one that didn't do that, because I thought, oh, Mercury or Mars was retrograde, obviously, at the time. That's why I'm telling the story. And I knew that. And I purposely didn't do that because I wanted to feel like, what does it feel like to have Mars retrograde sitting on a train and kind of then going in reverse? So it was an interesting one because it was literally stationing retrograde at the time. But that's what I'm saying. It's like it can be frustrating and we have to be really patient. The other thing that's happening is that Venus will move into Scorpio while this is happening, and Mars will be in Taurus. So they're in each other's signs. So that there'll be an exchange going on in November. I'll talk about that more next month. And this exchange, it's very dependent on the individual chart, of course, but exchanges at least show some compromise, at least. They show some negotiation. So this might be a more helpful indication, however brief, with this exchange. And especially with this kind of warlike situation developing into not just a war in Ukraine, but beyond, and Mars going rogue out of bounds. This is very worrying, of course. And so we need any kind of compromise that's on the table with Venus helping out. So this could be a good indication here of Venus in Scorpio overall, despite this Mars situation. The other thing is then the moon phases, and to look at the full moon on the 9th of October and the new moon and a partial solar eclipse on the 25th. This solar eclipse is important. It's a real turning point, I think, and it leads to a total lunar eclipse, which I'll briefly go through here as well, on November 8th. And even though lunar eclipses are said to bring up things more immediately, and they can bring it up really quickly and then it's dealt with and then it's gone. That's more so the case with lunar eclipses. Solar eclipses, they might not necessarily bring it up straight away, but it's lingering for a long time. And I think this eclipse is going to linger for a long, long time. And by next year, it's going to get triggered in a big way. Now, that also might suggest that it's getting triggered in not such good ways, because the South Node, as it transits this eclipse degree next year, and especially by the end of the year, next year, October, so this time next year, I do see the potential for a major stock market crash in that time. So the other thing about that, and it's all happening in Sidereal Libra, by the way, in October, this eclipse, is that it's about negotiation, and maybe negotiations breaking down, which kind of adds to this war situation that could really get out of hand at this time. So that's unfortunate. But again, drawing it into our personal experience, how do we channel this in more positive and more productive ways? And how do we change? And we're changing anyway, by the way. Solar eclipses always represent a change that's happening in that area of our life. And if you wish to be more familiar with where that's happening in your life, you can just think back to 2004, 2005, when the eclipses occurred here last, and maybe think about what was going on back then in your life, because that's where the change is happening again. So it happens every 18 years. There are 18-year cycles of the eclipses. So let's look at them in more detail. So the full moon first. So let's not skip over the full moon, because I think it's actually going to be really quite a nice full moon. As you can see, it's conjunct Jupiter. Jupiter is very powerful, very close to Earth at the moment, very bright. It'll be a really nice thing to look at in the night sky, the moon and Jupiter, very bright. So this October 9th period can be very enjoyable. Opposite, we have Venus and Mercury and the sun, of course. It's a full moon. And so all of the benefics, the kind planets, as they're called in Indian astrology, are influencing this moon. And so that's a good indication. Yes, Saturn is aspecting, but really it's mostly a nice indication. So it could be really enjoyable. Now, it could be too enjoyable as well, and overindulgence could creep in here because of a lack of, or a sense of lack with Venus and Virgo, because no matter how much Venus is propped up by Mercury right now in Virgo, in its exaltation sign, Venus is pulling down the mood somewhat. And yet Mercury and Jupiter are propping up Venus. So what does that mean? Well, basically, talking things out, explaining things, and connecting to something more meaningful is going to improve the mood. And so Venus is getting helped out here. And if this were not the case, it wouldn't feel too good at all. Now, having said that, as soon as Venus moved into Virgo, the pound tanked. So the pound sterling just tanked. That's Venus in Virgo. Venus is all about money. So there are some very real indications of this lack, this sense of lack in the economy and what it's going through right now. And, if the economy is to take a dive, it will very often do so when Venus goes into Virgo in autumn. And again, just look back in history. I did a whole study on this for the last 100 years, and that has been a big signature. But what's happening next year is even more challenging, I think, by October 2023. Venus is going to go into Virgo again, of course, but Mars is going to join them and then join Ketu, the south node in Libra, before it finishes out in Libra. So we've got some signatures coming up next year that are similar to the 1929 stock market crash. I'm not saying it's going to be a repeat of that, but I'm saying that there could be some major, major crash going on next year. And what we're seeing now is possibly a propping up of the economy in the interim. And it's kind of like a sticking plaster. So Venus again is debilitated, but it's propped up by Mercury. So what's interesting about that is Mercury's now stationed today, and it was retrograde right until October 2nd. And what did we see? We saw a decision being made by the British government that has created this issue in the UK, at least. And as soon as now Mercury has stationed, now they're backtracking. So now Mercury's changing direction, it's moving forward again, so they might reconsider. And this might also, again, prop up the pound and whatever adjustments that they make in the next few weeks. So whatever they do in the next few weeks, I think it might be a sticking plaster, but it might just prevent some major catastrophe going on in the world economy. But next year, I just don't see that happening. Next year, I see that there's going to be a major, major crash. So just keep that in mind. Now, I hope I'm wrong. Of course, I hope I'm wrong, but I've just, like I said, studied the last 100 years of stock market crashes, and there's just a very similar pattern happening next year. So that's the full moon. Now let's get to the new moon 2 weeks later. This is the eclipse. So on October 25th, there is a new moon at 7 degrees of Libra, sidereal Libra, which is tropical Scorpio. So you might hear about people talking about tropical Scorpio. That's one and the same thing to say that. It's sidereal Libra, and it's 1 degree away from Venus, which rules Libra. So this is involving Venus in a big way. Now, is this a major adjustment in the economy? Yes. Is this a major challenge to the economy? Absolutely. You've got a south node eclipse. Ketu is involved. And is this just major turmoil around the world? Yes, because negotiations, like I said, could break down here. And whatever negotiations have been in place, let's face it, that's not been at best recently, because Ketu is moving through Libra. And every time Ketu gets activated in a strong way like this, with the sun and moon and Venus itself there, the end of October is going to be quite challenging, I think. I'd also think that this could be the downfall of a major leader on the world stage. I don't know who exactly. I have an idea, but I don't want to say, because also I don't want to like predict that, that's, in a bad way in terms of somebody taken out. I don't want to say to that extreme or that dramatic, but it could just be someone stepping down as well. And it could just be the governments, some government. Like I'm looking at what's happening in Brazil, and, he may be replaced, the leader of Brazil. So, that's one example, right? But you could think of examples around the world. You see, Libra has got now a lot of malefic influence on it. It's got Saturn aspecting it as well. It's got Rahu opposite, obviously. And then we have that full moon, total lunar eclipse 2 weeks later. And again, it's a total lunar eclipse conjunct Uranus, which is squaring Saturn. So it's going to be a highly volatile period, I think, by the end of October, beginning of November. And as governments change and are, challenged, even if they don't change in a big way, we're going to feel that. And the economy is going to feel it. And in our personal lives, we're going to feel it. We're going to be challenged to change. So again, look at what areas of your chart these represent, Aries and Libra especially. So that's the new moon. And I want to just kind of take a sneak peek into the next month, because when we have an eclipse, so I'll just show you this eclipse first, but when we have an eclipse, it opens up what people call an eclipse window. And so, you know, it's like there's a couple of weeks of uncertainty as things start shifting around. So, and as it starts with a solar eclipse and leads to a full moon lunar eclipse, it kind of builds in intensity throughout this next 2 weeks after this October 25th. So, the end of October, beginning of November, be mindful of that intensity building. And this is the full moon and a lunar eclipse in November. So, again, I'm going into November here, but it's important to you kind of heads up for this one. So, we have, you can see here, the moon opposite the sun, of course, and within a degree of Uranus. And it's a total lunar eclipse. Now, this is the midterm elections in the US on November 8th. This is highly volatile. This is triggering once again the theme of the lunar mansion that's involved here, where this eclipse occurs, which is called barony, which means she who bears, which is all about abortion rights more recently. And this could be another trigger for what's going to happen in the midterms. This theme is really highly relevant right now. This kind of bearing something as well, to kind of produce something as well. Personally, again, we can look at what are we producing and what we maybe need to change and what could change very abruptly around this time in November. But one thing I found really fascinating. Now I'm going to kind of go off on a tangent here a little bit, but it's not really, because it's highlighting this theme. I was watching the series on Netflix about Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer, and the last episode highlighted that when Jeffrey Dahmer was in prison and he was being baptized in prison, at the very same time, John Wayne Gacy, the other serial killer, was being executed. So I was like, oh my God, this is like all of it rolled into one. Basically, why that's relevant is that that happened at the exact time of a solar eclipse in Barony in Aries, the sign that is representative of giving birth, but also death, because Barony is ruled by Yama, the god of death. And so it's all about paying for our sins. So literally, this serial killer, one serial killer is being executed at the same time that this other serial killer is being baptized, like being born again, if you will. And soon after he was killed. So it's just this real big themes of life and death. And again, the US is just one example, and the abortion rights and all of that with barony. Literally, the symbol of barony is the yoni, the female reproductive, right? It's literally the vulva, right? It's 3 stars pointing downwards, like the downward pointing triangle. And so it's all these themes of birth and death, major themes that are being triggered in a big way again in November. So I just thought that was highly interesting with this, you know, the release of this series. And so, by the way, when you're seeing things like that on TV, or if you're watching a movie, like, it doesn't always have to play out in actual events at the time. If it's been shown and if it's been exposed to mass media, people are watching it. It's number 1 on the charts. So everyone's watching this series. So it's bringing back the theme. It's happened before, right? When we had an eclipse in that sign, but it's happening again. It doesn't mean that the events are happening again, but we're reliving the events, is what I'm trying to say. So anyway, there are lots more to talk about with this eclipse. I'll talk more about the November eclipse next month. I just wanted to mention as well, though, that Mars will be retrograde at the time. It will be back into Taurus at the time. And Jupiter, after the new moon at the end of November, will station direct. So there's some major shifts going on in October and November. And just before I finish out, oh yeah, that was the chart for the US midterm elections. Again, I'm not going to go into this too much here. I'm going to talk about it more next time, but literally, look, what have you got? Opening of the polls, you have moon exactly conjunct Uranus for this total lunar eclipse. Sun, Mercury, highly, you know, that's really involved in it, in this eclipse, very closely conjunct Ketu and the sun exact. And Venus not too far away either, the ruler. This is highly volatile. This is going to shake things up in a big way. Saturn in a square to both. I mean, anyway, I'm going to talk more about that next month. But before I finish up, and that's the lunar eclipse, just so you can see it. Again, I'll go through this again. And you can see a lot of the world is seeing that. You can see America is seeing it. Major changes going on there. Before I finish up, I just want to mention that the magazine will be out in December for patrons and for the public in January. And if you're a $10 tier patron, you get the physical copy in December, and everyone gets digital access, of course, in December, but it won't be out until the new year for everyone else, for the public. So it's theme this year is not transits, it's dashas, the planetary cycles of Vedic or Indian astrology. So it's how we break up the chart in terms of like cycles or chapters in a person's life. And so there are many different types of dashas, and we've got some great articles here. We've got an article by Edith Hathaway, and she talks about how Jupiter dasha for two people with the same ascendant was very different, and how we can't just generalize dashas, and that her subtitle of that is a study in contrasts. So Jupiter dasha, a study in contrasts. Marianne Jacuzzi has written about the Trikona dasha, the trinal dasha, and the Shakti. And so the power of Shakti, it's a really good article. I've written about, or I've extracted an article from my new book, which is called also Timeline Astrology, all about dashes. As you can see, I'm obsessed with dashes. So I've, produced a whole magazine on it, and now a whole book, which will be out in the new year as well, on dashes. And I've extracted an article from that, or a piece from that. And then Barry Rosen has written about the different perspectives for the Vimshottari dasha, the 120-year-long cycle calculated from the moon, but how you can also calculate from different points based on where the moon is positioned. So a really important article by Barry Rosen. And a couple of patrons and readers and followers have also written about their own experiences of the dashas, their own dashas. So I'm really excited about sharing those as well, because I think it's really important to actually share our experiences of the dashas. And also then, as per usual, you get the timeline for the year, the ephemeris, as well as a transit guide to go through month by month, how I think the year is going to pan out with all the transits. So I have still included transits, of course, but remember that dashes are the main piece of it always. And so whatever transits are going on, if you can know your dashas, then you're going to be able to qualify that more so. So that's the magazine. Again, it'll be out at the end of this year for patrons, in the new year for everyone else. And so thanks for watching. If you would like to become a patron, remember there's only a few places left on the $5 tier. I think it's 8 places, and only 1 left on the $10 tier. So you can go to timelineastrology.com or patreon.com/timelineastrology. The Scorpio Video Club, that's what I call it. It's basically me sharing the secrets. That's why I call it Scorpio Video Club. It's me sharing the secrets of Indian astrology, things that you might not hear about in general astrology circles, and going into it more depth, and how literally how we read charts. So thanks again for watching. If you could like the video, I'd really appreciate it. Leave a comment if you have any questions, and subscribe. Okay, and wishing you all the very best for the month ahead. So I'm going to take questions now from those that are here live. So until next time.